January 14th, 1943. Casablanca. Late evening. In a shuttered room at the Anfield Hotel, cigarette smoke hung low as the Atlantic wind rattled the windows. Maps lay spread across the table, their edges pinned by coffee cups and ashtrays. At the center stood Winston Churchill, shoulders hunched, eyes bright with the restless energy of a man who believed history could still be bent by will alone. He had another plan. Across from him sat Brooke, his face impassive, his notebook already open. Brooke did not look at the Prime Minister. He looked at numbers, tonnage, divisions, fuel stocks, landing craft. What existed? What did not? Churchill spoke first. He spoke of seizing the initiative, of striking where the enemy least expected, of movement and momentum. He spoke as if audacity itself were a weapon. The war, he insisted, was being strangled by caution. Britain must act. Now. Brooke did not interrupt. He waited until Churchill finished and quietly counted the ships. Outside, the city of Casablanca slept, unaware that its name would soon be attached to a turning point in Allied strategy. Inside, the argument was not about courage. It was about arithmetic. Brooke spoke of overstretched supply lines, of men already committed, of fuel allocations that barely met existing operations. He did not say the plan was impossible. He said it could not be done yet. Churchill bristled. He had lived through Gallipoli, through the dark days of 1940, through years when Britain stood alone. He believed delay was its own form of defeat. Brooke believed impatience could lose the war. The room fell silent. This was not a clash of personalities. It was a collision of philosophies. One man measured war by opportunity. The other measured it by capacity. And in that silence, it became clear that only one of them would yield. Because whatever decision emerged from this room would shape the next year of the war. And once made, it could not be undone. To understand the tension in that Casablanca room, one had to understand the weight carried by both men. Winston Churchill had entered the war scarred by failure and sustained by defiance. He believed momentum saved nations. Every pause, every delay allowed the enemy to recover. In his mind, bold action was not recklessness, it was survival. Britain's empire, its prestige, and its influence over Allied strategy depended on visible leadership. Across the table, Brooke carried a different burden. As chief of the Imperial General Staff, he was responsible not for speeches, but for consequences. Every division committed to one theater meant another left exposed. Every landing required ships that could not be conjured by rhetoric. Brooke had watched armies destroyed, not by lack of courage, but by lack of preparation. Their conflict had been building for months. Since the landings in North Africa, Allied leaders had faced a question with no easy answer: where to strike next? Churchill pressed relentlessly for operations in the Mediterranean, Italy, the Balkans, anywhere that promised dramatic effect and political gain. He saw the region as the soft underbelly of Europe, a place where daring could unhinge the Axis. Brooke saw a trap. He knew the Mediterranean consumed resources without delivering decisive results. Every operation required landing craft desperately needed elsewhere. Meanwhile, American planners, led by George C. Marshall, were pressing for a direct assault on northern France. They wanted concentration. Brooke agreed with them more often than he admitted aloud. At Casablanca, Churchill sensed the balance shifting. The Americans were gaining strength. Britain's leverage rested on initiative, not numbers. Another bold plan, launched soon, could keep Britain at the strategic center of the alliance. So he pressed again. He spoke of Italy collapsing under pressure. He spoke of political shockwaves, of Mussolini falling, of German divisions pulled away from France and the Eastern Front. He framed the proposal not as a gamble, but as inevitability. Delay, he warned, would allow Germany to entrench everywhere. Brooke responded with figures. He listed the landing craft available, then listed the operations already claiming them. He cited divisions still refitting, shipping lanes threatened by submarines, and fuel stocks calculated down to weeks. He warned that committing prematurely would weaken the very invasion they all knew must come. Churchill's patience thinned. According to Brooke's later diary, the Prime Minister paced the room, voice rising, repeating the same question in different forms. If not now, then when? Each time, Brooke gave the same answer: when the means exist. This resistance was not an obstruction, it was containment. Brooke understood that Churchill's imagination outran Britain's capacity. His duty was to stop plans that inspired speeches but destroyed armies. As the night deepened, the disagreement hardened into something more dangerous than an argument. It became personal. Pride entered the room, and once pride entered, compromise grew harder. The war demanded a choice: movement or restraint, vision or calculation, and one of them would have to accept defeat, not in public, but in principle. By January 16, 1943, the argument had spilled beyond one room. Churchill carried his case to the wider Allied Council, pressing it with the same urgency. He spoke in plenary sessions, in corridors, over late dinners. The war, he insisted, rewarded those who struck first. He warned that waiting for perfect conditions meant surrendering initiative to the enemy. Britain had not survived by waiting. But Brooke was no longer alone. Across the table sat Franklin D. Roosevelt, attentive, measuring not just strategy, but alliance politics. Nearby, Dwight D. Eisenhower listened carefully. Eisenhower understood the brutal truth Brooke was outlining. He would be responsible for executing whatever decision emerged. He needed forces that could fight, not visions that looked good on paper. Brooke's resistance hardened into a line. He circulated memoranda. He spoke privately to American commanders. He warned that another premature thrust would drain strength from the decisive blow everyone knew was coming: the invasion of France. His diary recorded his frustration in restrained language, but the meaning was clear. The Prime Minister, he wrote, was dangerously attracted to the spectacular. Churchill sensed a shift. The room no longer leaned instinctively toward him. Each time he proposed acceleration, Brooke countered with logistics. Each time Churchill spoke of opportunity, Brooke spoke of attrition. It was relentless, calm, unyielding. The breaking point came when Churchill pressed for an expanded Mediterranean commitment beyond what planners believed sustainable. Brooke, for the first time, pushed back in front of others. He stated plainly that Britain did not possess the ships or fuel to support such a move without risking disaster elsewhere. Silence followed. Churchill was unused to being checked so directly. His authority rested on moral force as much as office. To be contradicted, calmly, publicly, and with evidence, cuts deeply. Witnesses later recalled the Prime Minister's face tightening, his voice controlled but sharp. He argued once more. He reframed the proposal. He appealed to instinct, to daring, to the necessity of movement. Brooke did not yield. He repeated the numbers. He repeated the constraints. He repeated the warning. This repetition mattered. It drained the drama from Churchill's vision. It reduced ambition to feasibility. In war councils, imagination could inspire, but only arithmetic could decide. What emerged was not Churchill's plan, nor Brooke's ideal timeline, but a compromise shaped by resistance. The Allies would strike, yes, but on a scale Brooke believed could be sustained. The operation would aim for Italy, but with limited objectives, strict resource ceilings, and a clear understanding that nothing must delay preparations for France. Churchill agreed in words. Privately, the moment marked something irreversible. For the first time since 1940, Churchill had been forced to retreat not by political opposition, but by his own military chief. The decision stood. The machinery of war began to move along Brooke's calculations, not Churchill's instincts. And though no one said it aloud, a boundary had been set. The Prime Minister could inspire the war, but he could no longer command it unchecked. The private reckoning came later. That evening, away from the council table, Winston Churchill summoned Alan Brooke for a final exchange. No aides, no Americans, just two men who had carried Britain through its darkest years. Churchill was quieter now. He acknowledged the figures, he acknowledged the limits, but he did not disguise his frustration. War, he said, was not won by accountants. It was won by men willing to take risks before the enemy did. History, he warned, would not be kind to timidity. Brooke listened. Then he answered with a statement that ended the argument. If they failed now, failed through overreach, there would be no chance for history to judge courage. There would only be defeat. He reminded the Prime Minister that Britain no longer fought alone and could not afford to bleed strength in operations that felt decisive but changed nothing fundamental. According to Brooke's diary, Churchill paused. Then came the line that revealed everything. He did not deny Brooke's reasoning. He did not refute the numbers. Instead, he conceded with bitterness. He said that Brooke was probably right, but that being right was a cold comfort when it meant waiting. It was not an apology, it was an acknowledgement. The plan was blocked. From that moment, Brooke's role changed. He was no longer merely the man who translated Churchill's vision into military form. He became the brake, the necessary obstacle, the voice that said no when no one else dared. The cost was personal. Brooke recorded that these confrontations left Churchill exhausted and resentful. The Prime Minister felt constrained in the very war he believed he had saved. Yet he did not remove Brooke. He did not sideline him. He kept him close, because he knew, even in anger, that Brooke prevented catastrophe. The decision reshaped Allied operations for the rest of 1943. Resources were husbanded. Timetables hardened. The invasion of Italy proceeded cautiously, bounded by logistics rather than ambition, and crucially, preparations for France continued without diversion. Churchill turned his energy elsewhere, toward speeches, diplomacy, and sustaining morale. His influence remained immense, but the era of unchecked strategic improvisation was over. For Brooke, the victory was invisible. There were no communiques announcing restraint, no medals for plans never launched, only the quiet knowledge that armies had not been wasted. This was the paradox of power in wartime Britain. The Prime Minister embodied defiance, the general embodied survival, and between them lay the future of the alliance. The war moved forward not because one man prevailed, but because one man resisted. And resistance, in that moment, proved decisive. The consequences unfolded without ceremony. In the months that followed Casablanca, Allied power accumulated rather than scattered. Shipyards filled the gap Brooke had warned about. Landing craft multiplied. Divisions trained, rested, and reorganized. Fuel stocks stabilized. What had been shortages became margins. What had been risk became preparation. The invasion of Italy went forward, but without illusion. It toppled beneath the Mussolini, as Churchill had predicted, but it did not break Germany. Instead, it fixed German divisions in place, exactly as Brooke had calculated. The front hardened. The war clarified. By early 1944, the arithmetic Brooke had insisted upon finally aligned with Churchill's vision of decisive action. When Allied leaders gathered to authorize the assault on France, the numbers spoke for themselves. Over 150,000 troops, nearly 7,000 ships. Air superiority is measured in thousands of aircraft. This was not audacity alone. This was mass. Churchill did not claim credit. He did not need to. His speeches framed the moment as destiny fulfilled. Yet those closest to power understood the deeper truth. This invasion existed because earlier ones had been refused. Brooke, watching from his maps and tables, knew what had been preserved. His diaries would later reveal the strain of holding the line against charisma and impatience. He wrote not of triumph, but of relief. The war, at last, was being fought on terms that allowed victory rather than invited disaster. The balance of power within Britain's war leadership never returned to its earlier form. Churchill remained the indispensable voice of defiance, but strategy had become collective, constrained, and disciplined. The age of singular will had given way to coalition reality. This moment mattered not because of what happened, but because of what did not. No reckless landing, no wasted army, no strategic collapse born of pride. History often celebrates boldness. It rarely records restraint. Yet in that Casablanca room, restraint altered the course of the war. Progress emerged not from agreement, but from resistance. Not from inspiration, but from refusal. Churchill would always be remembered for what he dared to say and do. Brooke would be remembered, if at all, for what he stopped. And in war, that difference can decide the fate of continents.